and wine if you haven't done already. So this is a sort of frequent, not necessarily that regular, but fairly frequent book event where we have authors and other people coming along talking about music books, not just rock and roll, but all sorts of other genres we've covered as well. And there's another one coming up, just to mention that right now in case I forget later, which is Stuart Cosgrove talking about his book Memphis 68, and that's on the 15th of November, but there's more details about that on the Facebook and Twitter. So this evening we're very fortunate to have Jeanette Leech talking about Fearless, and unprecedented for the Walthamstow Rock and Roll Book Club. 3 people who she talks with and writes about in the book, Margaret Fiedler, David Callahan and Graham Sutton, and I'll let you introduce them in more detail in a moment. Thank you to Waterstones for hosting this event. Please do take a look at the book, buy a copy if you're interested. Waterstones would be delighted, as would we. And I'm just going to hand over to Jeanette now, and we usually go for about 45 minutes or something, have a bit of time for questions at the end, and we try to avoid overrunning and being locked into the mall, as did happen once when we had Bricksmith here. But I'll probably wave my hands or something if we're overrunning. Over to you, Jeanette. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much all for coming. I'm really happy to be here, especially because it's Walthamstow, because Walthamstow has a connection with all 3 of the people who are lucky enough to be on the panel tonight. So I met Margaret and Dave in a pub called The Checkers, which I'm sure you know if you know Walthamstow, just around the corner, and we did our interview there. And Graham from Bach Psychosis, I know came from East London, from Woodford, so from that sort of East London Essex borders. So it feels kind of appropriate. And just to say a little bit about my book, I really wanted to write this book because I felt that nothing really satisfying had been written about the genre of post-rock, and I felt there were loads and loads of misconceptions about it. That it was very male, it was filled with nerds, that there were no stories, and all this sort of stuff. Even though people really liked the music, I felt that people wrote about it in kind of a dry and exclusionary fashion. And for me, when I really got into it, when I really started listening to it, all I heard was emotion and heart, and I thought, this stuff really hasn't been brought out. So that was my guiding principle when I started writing this book. And Graham, I think, was my first interview, and I was lucky enough to get someone who the term post-rock as a standalone term was actually coined for, the band Bach Psychosis and his album Hex. Because my editor was the brothers of These New Puritans, who Graham has produced, so we had that connection that way. And through Graham, I met Dave and Margaret from Moonshake, and that felt really a great privilege, really, because they had split up in somewhat infelicitous circumstances, and it was a really great honour to interview them together to hear about the Moonshake story, and it really bore out what I wanted to do with the book, which was bring out some of the human stories behind that. So thank you, Graham, Dave and Margaret, for being here on the panel tonight with me. I'd like to sort of really start by talking about what the atmosphere was like when you formed both Moonshake and Bach Psychosis, because the impression I got from interviewing all 3 of you was that you were all really interested in shaking things up and like really making, a difference, being really ambitious about the music that you wanted to make.
Well, it was a time when I guess the biggest things on the underground were probably dance music. Acid house had kind of broken, and the post-hardcore bands from the States. And I guess personally, I thought all those things I was listening to, like hip-hop, dance music, and things like Sonic Youth and Big Black, could all be put together, possibly with tunes even. And I think I found a like mind in Ms. Fiedler at the time, who pretty much liked similar things, I think. Yeah, it seemed like it was in a little bit like punk rock times, and everything seemed bigger, and you couldn't really achieve it, kind of thing. And there was a big gap in music that. Plus, the other thing is, I've been really inspired by hearing what hip hop people were doing with samplers, and that hadn't even happened too much, apart from the occasional like nerd. It hadn't really happened in dance music much, and it seemed like there was a whole lot of stuff you could do with a sampler, not copying. I mean, at the time everyone's going, yeah, you're just ripping people off, you're just taking their records and then you're singing over the top of them or something. But it seemed to me that you could do all those kind of running things backwards, slowing them down, combining sounds, making weird noises and putting them into songs in the way that psychedelic bands did in the 60s in a kind of way.
Yeah, they had their moods and their moods.
Exactly.
Right.
Moods, yeah.
Moods. And their arps and their whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, it seemed that there was a whole thing that could be done with underground music to make it kind of just original again, really. There was a lot of there was some good bands around, but there was a lot of unoriginality as well, and we soon find ourselves on bills with other people who seem to feel the same way, like Pram. I don't think we ever played with you, did we? But we would have done if we'd been asked.
Yeah.
I think actually, at least for us, like a lot of it was actually John Peel at the time, in terms of the broad spectrum of stuff he'd play, from like sort of South African jive to Ivor Cutler to Buttle Surfers to Cocktail Twins or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like
It all
really
works.
was,
It's
and
just like
that was
Catholic
like,
with a small C.
yeah, and that was like a really, you know, for me growing up, that was like a massive influence in terms of, you know, just being turned on different stuff. But I was reminded at the weekend of like when we went to, I formed a band at school with my best friend, and we just used a drum machine. So when I persuaded him to leave school when I was 15 and to go into doing music. And
His parents love you.
Yeah, and actually I managed to get a couple of other fuckers with me as well, and they've never sort of forgiven me.
Come and squat with me.
yeah, exactly, yeah. But I was actually reminded at the weekend that we put an advert in this music shop in Leighton, and it was like, drummer wanted likes Cocktail Twins and Buttle Surfers. So it was everything was like wide open, at least for us. And then seemingly there were some other people knocking about that had sort of quite a broad, open-minded approach to music. Were interested in taking bits and pieces from here, there, and the other. And also technology becoming cheaper as well, like you say with the sampler and stuff. And actually the access to that,
I remember 2 years of yearning where samplers were too expensive for someone on the dole to afford, and you just weren't getting any money off record companies and publishers. And then I just got this check for like about 600 quid and saw this Roland machine which had like 4 seconds or 8 seconds in it, I can't remember which, and just going, oh, I need this machine, and just spending the whole lot on this machine. And then it had so little memory, it seemed like amazing at the time, it had so little memory that I had to, when I was ripping off noises off Junk Shop Records, I had to play them at 78 so I could get more music into the machine. So you had to be very kind of imaginative and inventive when you were using this new technology, because all you could afford was the kind of real entry level stuff,
But it was incredible, that stuff. Actually, it was like the price of a crappy second-hand car or something like that. But between in a band, if it's like 4 people in a band, like all pitching in to buy something, it's almost doable. At a time when like records, even independent records, they still generate a certain amount of money. Gigs generated that certain amount of money.
50 quid.
Yeah, exactly.
They still do now, don't they? It's still 50 quid.
Yeah. No, I talked to a guy who managed bands in the 60s, and apparently the support band slot was 50 quid.
It's the two things that have never changed in music. It's 50 quid for a support band and £10 for a gram of speed. That's it. It's never changed.
Yeah, but my first sampler was 800 milliseconds. Yeah.
Made out of plastic and bought in Toys R Us.
It's on City Poison, that's the pedal.
That's right. Yeah, you often had to sample things in like little digital delay pedals that had like a second or two in, and you just run a loop. People do it now. You see lots of people with acoustic guitars playing loop pedals now. But
we won't mention the Most horrible one. Who headlined
But
a
it's
wonderful festival.
funny how
Lose our head.
I think it's really funny how that stuff has come actually quite, obviously
Oh, yeah.
mainstream.
Yeah,
it's
totally
like
mainstream.
it's
Yeah.
hilarious. So
Yeah.
But I remember those pedals as well. Of like,
Yeah.
you've got like the little record function at the end of it.
Yeah, but
So
again,
Like,
you
so
can, you can
like you
slow
say,
it down.
800 milliseconds or whatever. It's like,
There was a lot of bands I liked and that we supported, and I can remember setting up a sampler on the side of the stage and then just looking at us like we'd farted or something. It was just, what the heck, that's not real music. Was coming from people you thought were extreme and underground.
yeah.
But hopefully we showed them.
Well, on the subject of samplers, one thing that the three of you all brought up in the interviews and was interesting, something that's come out in that people have picked up on the reviews of Fearless, was that I talk about the influence of Public Enemy.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, Bomb Squad.
Yeah, and I think that's really, the three of you, when I interviewed all of you, you talked a lot about that, and it made
Disco Inferno, really big Public Enemy fans.
yeah,
As well.
it made like total sense, and it was one of the joys of post rock to understand all these different things that went into it that didn't seem obvious.
My
what
big
I
thing
mean?
was like saying the Public Enemy were a post rock band. Like or at least
Yeah.
like of how big an influence. Like, do you know what I mean? In terms of like even like saying the Police were the post rock band.
That was a bit. There is an element of prog, and like, please do not go there with the Police. But yeah, that's sorry. I totally draw the line.
It's true that as
there is a line.
Most of the first, if you could call us kind of the first wave of the bands doing this kind of thing, there was definitely it was a lot simpler and a lot more brutal and straightforward, and it definitely became more mathematical as the influences of like Slint and people like that came in, and it became a lot more tricky rhythmically, which I kind of was opposed to what my thinking really.
Were you guys
exactly, yeah.
were you guys aware of Slint when they first came when Spylam was
No,
first
I
released?
actually it was the Albini review of the album.
really?
That's when I bought it.
Because I was genuinely
I
I
bought
knew
it
nothing
from the
about
Albini
them at
review.
all. I didn't.
We bought Tweez when we were in the Wolfhounds a few years earlier.
Okay,
Right,
so he beats
fucking
me.
hit.
1, 2, 3. That's the coolness.
But that hip hop and stuff like Fugazi and those kind of bands like Slint and so forth were what kept you kind of mentally alive if you were into kind of underground music in the late
Definitely.
80s.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I like to tune, but even the kind of decent pop bands in the mid 80s are all kind of like mostly petered out. And the only real promising ray of light to go into the future, if you will, was sampling technology, really.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we still played guitars and basses and drums and other instruments.
There was
too.
never a computer on stage.
There was never a computer on stage. That's right. Yeah. And I used to hate laptop kind of merchants.
There was no laptop back then. I mean, it's
No,
like the idea.
No, there wasn't.
Do you know what I
No,
mean? It's
they were like the
the
size
possibility
of a
of
small
doing that
house.
stuff is like,
Yeah.
Yeah, once
that's
I'd
like pre-ADAT.
if you have an Atari breakdown on stage in the middle of a gig, then you'd never want to use it again. Yeah.
I mean, it's something you've touched on, but it was interesting when I was researching the book how influential the music press was in the mid-90s, and you found one another through Melody Maker, didn't you? Did your first demo was in Melody Maker as well, wasn't it, Graham?
In '87,
Yeah.
when I was at school, yeah.
So, and obviously the term post-rock was coined by Simon Reynolds when he was actually writing in The Wire. But were you all sort of avid readers of the music press, and how important was that to, I suppose, your identity and, the atmosphere of the time?
Well, we all read the music press. I mean, because it was,
They were interesting writers, but also you were kind of hoping you'd be in it.
yeah, you did just, you went to the places where they sold it on, what was it? It was like Monday night, Tuesday. When did it come out?
It was Wednesday night on
Wednesday
Tottenham
night,
Court Road.
Tottenham
yeah.
Court Road,
Right.
yeah, you could get it before it actually sort of hit the shops the next morning. You just kind of wanted to see whether your gig was reviewed or not. Really, because there weren't like...
There were critics whose opinions you respected, and if they slagged you off or praised you, they'd be kind of qualifiers for that,
Yeah.
and they'd be good writers because of that. And we actually got rather slagged off when we first put our records out. It was only later we became press darlings. For the first release or two, got a bit of a kicking really. So, but if you're in a band and you can't get through that, then you've no business being in a band really.
Yeah.
So.
I remember that you told me that it was that first single that you mentioned. It was single of the WEAK.
Yeah, single of the week.
Yeah, that was our creation. Right?
But soon after that, they did love you very much. I mean, I think that both Bart Psychosis and Moonshake got quite a lot of critical acclaim at that time.
People got the hang of it once the first album came out.
Yeah.
And they really, but until then, we were still getting. Even when the second single, Secondhand Clothes, came out, which kind of pretty much solidified what we were going to do. Even that we had people slagging us off on the radio when they played it. It was like they felt obliged to play it, but they still felt they had to put in some criticism. They had to have a dig, while they were playing your music. So
there was kind of an attitude around our way of like that it was all very unhealthy for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but and it wasn't even coming from me, but it was very much like it was not a good thing,
What,
keep
music
that stuff
press
away.
attention?
Yeah, for some reason, it was looked on as being incredibly like a negative influence or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you're more from that kind of, you're a bit more autonomous.
I don't care. I mean,
sort of
some
thing,
of my best friends are journalists, But
Theresa May thought that too.
no, but I don't. Yeah, I'm not entirely. I think it's more a thing of like people react. Certain people in the band reacted badly, whatever anyone said, whether it was like something nice or something nasty, or whether it was something good or positive or whatever. It's like people felt under a magnifying glass or something, or they just didn't like the attention somehow, whatever.
The thing I didn't like is you didn't get a chance to kind of ferment. You'd form a band and then you'd be in the papers.
Yeah.
Months.
Yeah, maybe it was that. Maybe it's
But that's
that.
the difference, and you pointed out in your book about, the fact that American bands just have years.
Yeah.
They have years in a garage or a basement to hone their craft, and they're fucking tight. They're just so good.
Yeah.
And they just had access to so much amazing equipment. They'd show up with this beautiful 1955 this and 1962 that, and you're like, that sounds really nice.
And the actual sort of underground in America as well is like much more developed, and it's much stronger, and it's not this sort of it's not this sort of flash in the pan thing as it was over here. Exactly. Yeah.
So that's why there were scenes. There were Louisville, and there was Seattle, and there was definitely.
We were also doing this in a time of there was a pretty big recession going on when we first started, and some of the American bands that played used to stay round our houses, and I remember John McIntyre from Tortoise staying in our flat in Mare Street in Hackney, and he was standing by the bus stop going, we've got a recession in the States, but you guys have got a depression, No one had any money at all. I mean, it was still, I've been in bands for about 10 years, and we were still nicking stuff and still borrowing stuff, So.
Signing on.
I think signing on too, yeah.
Well,
I didn't sign on.
I think that was.
But you did squat, and
squat.
the Dolan squatting.
No, it's true. There was definitely. I know you think of squatting more 80s, but in the early 90s,
that was really
that was
important.
part of the reason that I was able to.
That was the way to actually sort of
be in a band.
do it.
Yeah.
Well, I lived in a squat in Whitechapel, and we had a 10-pound
Rampart
communal. In Rampart Street. Yeah, the house is torn down.
It's been gentrified.
Yeah. And we had a 10-pound food kitty, and then my rehearsal room was, we shared, Moonshake shared a rehearsal room in the futon factory on Balls Pond Road, which is now expensive luxury flats.
Flats as well, yeah.
Like all of us linked in.
We had a room above the futon factory that we'd soundproofed.
With futons.
Yeah, with
They're
futons,
fucking amazing.
And shared with the Faith Healers and the Silverfish, so it wasn't all like post-rock. We used to, there was a lot of scenes
rock
going
bands.
on.
It's not just rock.
So it was like post-rock and the Camden Lurch.
It was a short-lived Camden Lurch scene, yeah.
But between my rehearsal room rent and my squat food, it was 20 pounds a week. I had a bicycle, and that was it.
You didn't have a roof at some point, did you?
No, I did not. It snowed on me.
But it was amazing that you could actually do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You could actually dedicate all your time and
But
all your
that was
energies
how
into doing
it worked.
it.
That was how it worked.
It's called
And
homeless
it's
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Well, that's all the drummer
yeah.
jokes, What do you call a drummer without a girlfriend? Homeless. Sorry.
But I guess the overarching point is if anyone wonders why there's not so much kind of a chance taking in art and music now, it's because there's not so much of a safety net anymore, especially if you come from a working or low middle class background, or you've just broken away from your parents. You might be from a more well-off background, but then there was squats, and there was the dole, and there was always like cheap shared housing and jobs you could. You know, if you worked in a cafe and you wanted to go on tour, you could leave, and you'd get another one when you came back a month or 6 weeks later.
It was doable, wasn't
it?
it?
You could
You could
do
do
it.
it.
You could get around it, and you could create, and you could spend most of your day writing songs or organising your kind of, if you like, your business as a band. And
But
I think
it was-
that's
it's
nearly all
work.
gone now. I think.
I mean, and you do it's like
was work,
it was work. It was
Hardest
work.
I've ever worked in my life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, going 9 to 5 is easier.
It's a relief. Yeah.
That's not the word I would choose. But,
It's a compromise.
Yes.
But maybe because of the situations that you all were living in, there's a real strong sense in that sort of first era of British post-rock of London and the urban nature of whether it's like the sort of shit and the grit or the hope or all that sort of stuff, I think really comes through in that era of British post-rock. Was that conscious that you did, or was it just a product of how you were living?
It's a bit. I mean, it was intentional that we were reflecting our surroundings. You know, there was definitely a bit of that going on. And even the videos, they look a lot more urban and industrial than a lot of the other bands at the time. But yeah, you have to kind of adapt what you know into something. You know, we were striving. You know, we were trying to make things better for ourselves, but not quite sure where that question was going really.
But I remember that you talked in the interview about the sort of influence of Dr. John and urban voodoo, and sort of saying that was something that you were interested in for London.
Yeah, it was like a kind of obsession. The Dr. John Night Tripper album and the 3 albums afterwards were kind of obsessions of the whole band, really, weren't we? That was like major tour van stuff for about 2 years. And yeah, there was the idea. I mean, he was very much. He's kind of a fake, really. He kind of did that gree thing as if he was some kind of shaman from the Santeria scene in New Orleans. But he knew a bit about it, but it wasn't, you know, it was a character he created. The whole atmosphere of that stuff, that kind of spooky kind of groove, and how could you put it? Kind of melding that with kind of the stuff that was going on around us. I mean, London felt, it's worse, you know, now in some respects in places, but it felt really run down and really kind of like used and exhausted, and having a lot of that kind of stuff mixed in. It's kind of, I hate these phrases that people come with, but it's a bit like magical realism. It's kind of like, it's all the dirt there, but you're also...
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
There's the beauty of it.
Yeah, it's the beauty of the whole thing as well.
Can I just say, it's fantastic just hearing you say about Dr. John, because it's like, you know, I've never heard you guys talk about Dr. John before, and so it's really interesting to hear about stuff that we might have liked or whatever, and like hearing about other people liking similar stuff. You know, I don't know how that happens. Maybe there's something, I don't know what the connection is at all, but it's just really lovely hearing that.
And Graham, you had your own sort of urban thing with the church in Stratford. How did that come about?
But that was just the nature. The Mark, the drummer that we hooked up with, was doing a community project in the crypt of the church in Stratford. So he had access to it, so he had keys, and we could just use these godforsaken, like really like mouldy, rotten, damp rooms. We'd store all the gear, and like, you know, every 6 months, like the maintenance all the time of like resoldering stuff, like taking it all apart, cleaning it all out. But at least we had a space, because we could. I mean, although we could afford to buy a cheap sampler, we were too tight to really like pay for rehearsal spaces. And I don't think, and actually thinking about it, I don't think we could have done. And also, and it would have also been a thing of like, oh fucking hell, we're hearing like, you know, the metal band next door or something like that, and it just would have been too much. So we had our own little space, as nasty as it was and as smelly as it was. It was like ours. We could go down there whenever we wanted, and that was really, really important to us, I think. I mean, the urban thing that you're talking about, I do know what you're talking about, but I think it was just the nature of it just sort of seeped into what you're doing. Yeah. You know, because your feelers are up, you're listening to, you know, what's happening around you, you listen to other musics that are going on and different bits and pieces, but I don't know if it was, at least for us, I don't know if it's like a conscious, you know, this is going to be urban music or whatever, but you want to do stuff that sort of reflects how you feel in your own, you know, life experience.
Yeah, we had this thing about our music had to be about something, because at the time it didn't, there was even things I liked, like Sonic Youth Daydream Nation had that kind of urban feel, but it seemed to be very abstract, and all the dance music was just kind of like a few phrases sampled that seemed to have no meaning, and part of what we discussed was having songs that meant something, wasn't it, really, sort of thing, and so you'd find definitely precise subject matters in both mine and Mags's songs, even though we write in completely different ways. But that, I think, were compatible, but they were definitely... There's also, in retrospect and on reflection, there was kind of a yin and yang thing going on, wasn't there? There was definitely a male and female contrast going on. I don't know why that would be.
I've got to say, I love the whole thing with Moonshake, of like the two different voices and the two different seemingly from the outside of like two different approaches, and yin and yang or whatever, however way you want to couch it. But I loved hearing the different voices as much as anything.
Margaret was very yangry.
Yangry, yeah. Well, I remember actually there was one time, because for a while we were, I know, kind of maybe the next big thing, and there was that time you mentioned it earlier, Bedford Esquires. Do you remember that? And an EMI scout came. So we're talking like major label, which we're like, and he just sort of said, yeah, but it just never works with two front people. And Dave and I just like rattled off like how many bands work with two front people, starting with the Beatles, Fleetwood Mac. And we just like pummeled this guy into the ground until he was just like, can I buy you some more drinks? We're like, yeah!
On reflection, we should have literally pummeled him into the ground.
Yeah, we should have.
So.
But yeah, I mean, I didn't see a problem with having two different songwriting styles, two front people in a band.
As a listener, that's something I really enjoyed.
It was the idea.
Yeah, it was the idea. It was the idea. Yeah, and a little maybe different than a lot of people in your book, but just to.
But that's especially the first half of your book. The acts in there are all completely different. It was only later that I didn't ever like the term anyway, but the term post-rock came to imply. I'm not going to criticise either way, but it came to imply that kind of ambient kind of guitar band.
Yeah. All male,
almost
ambient
like,
guitar band.
almost
well,
like
actually not all male.
A pastoral shoegaze kind of music, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what it's come to imply.
In time signatures.
Yeah, and weird time signatures, but everyone was completely different. I mean, even people, we all used to live together and knew each other, even people like Stereolab and the Fiedlers and Pram and all those, we all kind of knew each other, but everyone was completely different, and even if we had the same influences, it would be completely taken in a different direction, So.
Well, I think that was one of the things that I was really interested in exploring, how post-rock turned from when it was coined in 1994, which seemed quite a open-ended thing. I mean, something when Simon Reynolds coined it and sort of explored it in the Big Wire article, it was really expansive and included a lot of really, really disparate bands. And the fact that it just kind of narrowed and came to mean something that was a sort of certain volume dynamic type of usually instrumental, kind of very sort of male, almost epic music as well, which was like totally different to, I think, the original intentions of the term.
It's like how punk rock meant Patti Smith and the Talking Heads and Television and Richard Hell, and then it meant the UK subs. So it's kind of it's the same. It's kind of narrowing.
I think it's inevitable in some respects.
Does it happen to every genre?
I was going to say it happens to. If I think about all different genres in my head, it's like they all end up doing that thing because there is no genre at the start of them, and then it gets gradually funneled down. It happens to everything.
Did you mind any of you being called or labelled that post-rock term?
Well, Moonshake were never actually called it because we were kind of pre-it, but my subsequent band did do, I think it was probably May or June 94, so it was just after that Wire article where Simon Reynolds coined the term. He did a Melody Maker feature, but it was like I think it was like Scorn and Maine, and he said, look, I've got a full page. The only way I was able to get this full page, because it's all just horse trading, was that I've basically created a scene. And so he said as much. He said, like, you're kind of were in rock bands and no, you're not. That was literally what he said, and he did trail off like that.
It sounds very well thought through for a journalist, to be honest.
No, I mean, I think he does think things through. I'm not undermining that. I just mean that, that's just how it is. It's like your editor is like, okay, I don't want to give you a page for these bands because they're not that big, or, I don't know, they're not going to sell papers. That's what he's looking for.
Those were the negotiations that went on behind the music fest at the time.
Exactly.
If you interview me, I can get you 2 pages. If you go with him, he can only get you half a page. It's that kind of thing.
Yeah. So, there was an element of that. But, I can't see that, like, Scorn and Maine were, much like Leica. But, yeah, but we all listen to the same music, which is what we're saying. You don't make records that sound the same. But everybody was coming from the same source material.
And that's what I find fascinating. That's what I find fascinating.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. You just go off into a prism.
Yeah.
And that's what post-rock was so exciting. And also, because, now everybody has access to everything. You just download it or you just stream it or whatever. But, there was sort of, I don't know, what do you guys pick up? I don't know, it's just that, when did everybody's tastes get so wide? Or were they always? But people just didn't make music like that.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Okay, I'll shut up now.
I'll be honest. I don't know.
Graham, what about you? Because the review of Hex was the first time that post-rock was used as a standalone term.
Your fault, mate.
Did you care? Did you think?
I didn't read it. It was reported back to me that there was like you've done all right. It's like that Yes Minister episode. We're like, you've done all right. Yeah, but I at that point I was just really didn't want to know what was going on really. But many years, not many years later, maybe I don't know 8 or 9 years later, I ended up reading it. I found out about it all, but at the time I was kind of oblivious to it already.
I write in chapter 8 in my book is called 1994, the year post-rock broke, because it's when you guys all broke up, and I think Disco Inferno lasted 1 more year, but they broke up. So it seemed like the first generation seemed to get to an emotionally fractious point.
It was really.
At that time.
There's tough and there's tough. We weren't starving in Eritrea or something, but it was really hard work for very little reward other than emotional. I think it was like something we did 24/7, as they say nowadays, and we never had any respite, and we were just touring and rehearsing and recording with not a break. But we didn't have that advantage of having signed to a big label and having loads of money thrown at us either. So it was a constant struggle to survive. And so, you just break, and communication breaks down as well. You have no time away from each other. It's just,
Yeah, we had no management, no kind of,
Tried to get management, but it just didn't happen, did it?
Yeah. Maybe they could have been mediators. I have no idea, but I didn't. Yeah, we couldn't lose 20% of nothing. So, that wasn't gonna happen. But it's interesting. You referenced the sort of famous Steve Albini article where he goes through all the money, kind of post-Nirvana of this massive sort of open checkbook of the American, well, it happened over here too, but the record industry just trying to find the next Nirvana. But Steve Albini breaking it down to the fact that these guys should have just bloody, worked at the 7-Eleven at the corner. And it's brutal, that essay. And it's, but it still kind of holds true.
I remember reading, because after we went our separate ways, I carried on with Moonshake, and we ended up being signed to a major label twice in the States. And we came out on American Recordings and BMG as well. And that article that Albini wrote, where he broke it down until you are left in debt with like the $100,000 having had $2 million spent on you, really struck a bell. It was like, why the hell didn't we just stay on an indie, Because now people kind of, I wouldn't say people make a living, but they manage to keep going and manage to keep turning stuff over because they keep it on a low level, and you just press up enough records to make the money back to do the next one, and you still get a bit of attention online. People find you. And I'm pretty sure that the audience we had that actually cared about us, we could have got that way, really. We didn't need to sign to bigger labels or anything. When everyone at the time, it was partly the novelty that they're going to sign a load of weird music. It will be like Frank Zappa and Beefheart in the 60s, where major labels didn't know what was going on, and they signed all this weird shit, and you could pick it up 10 years later as a school kid and go, bloody hell, what's this? Like,
That was on Warner's. Yeah.
It's all on Warner Brothers or CBS, but that was, you kind of wanted to be that. But my ambitions were, I wanted to be on those labels. I wanted to be on Elektra and be Tim Buckley or Captain Beefheart or something.
Yeah.
But that wasn't going to happen because we were on the down curve. But yeah, it's much more. People are more sensible now. They kind of know what their business reach is going. You have to think of it in business terms. Unfortunately, you can't just lie around in velvet flares and create.
Which is what we did.
Clearly, what we did on a beanbag with an opium pipe.
It's funny though, because like my experience was like the independents we dealt with. I mean, I you know, we're on a couple of independent labels, and then we're signed to Virgin for one album before it all imploded, and the independent labels that we were on, they were sharks. I mean, they were like really not good people at all, not good people, and you know, I've subsequently worked with like a lot of different labels, a lot of different bands. I've seen a lot of different situations, and that's the only thing I regret. Is like, fucking hell, I like fell in with like the worst how did that happen? You know, and then they've got you for life as well. It's terrible.
Yeah, no, they take your rights for...
Yeah.
I mean, that said, I would just like to say, yes, we all hate record labels. That doesn't mean you should just take music for free. It's still good. Because some of the money does filter through to us. Sorry, just a public service announcement.
The other thing, aside from your interpersonal tensions, which happened in 1994, was...
1993.
1993, sorry.
Interpersonal tensions happened all the time.
We actually split up in 93.
Yeah, we just had enough of each other by then.
I mean, that whole era was also time when Britpop really came to the fore, and it was sort of something that I felt that stopped dead kind of a lot of interesting music that was happening, because it sucked a lot of attention away from it into something that was very easily digestible. And I don't know if any of the panel have opinions on that.
Yeah, I hated Britpop. It was horrible. And it's partly because I was arrogant enough to think that the pop music should be going the direction I'm going in. Not it shouldn't be looking back to the Beatles. And, you know, I love the Beatles, I love the Kinks especially. But hearing Blur and Oasis was kind of like hearing, you know, like people doing kind of tribute acts or something. It was horrible, you know. I mean, I had a bit of time for Pulp, but they weren't really a, you know, Britpop band anyway. But
I've been going for 10 years.
At least, yeah. But yeah, I didn't really. I knew it was popular, but then our music was never going to be popular. But it was hard to see attention being taken away just when you thought you'd gained it. You know?
Yeah, because it did seem to like just sort of really filter a lot of stuff. When I was researching the book, I went through a lot of the British Library is amazing because it has the ledgers of all the old music press, and I was just going through it like a nerd, like, you know, year by year, looking at it. And it was amazing because in 92, 93, for the first half of 93 certainly, there was a lot of really interesting stuff that was going on. People who were making like really cool music were getting big features. And then all of a sudden the whole thing was pretty much Britpop. And like the Britpop also rounds got like huge covers that the post-rock bands could only dream of. And it just seemed like a real shame that it had stopped dead a lot of interesting stuff, and Britpop became so big that even like the really terrible bands.
I dispute that it stopped it dead because many bands still carried on. Certainly bands like Stereolab managed to get bigger and bigger. My Bloody Valentine didn't lose any interest during that time. And also we went to America and got a lot of attention there. You know, it was underground attention.
But it was a thing of like, I remember, you know, I just remember that cover of like Yanks Go Home.
Oh, yeah,
Do you know what I mean? All that stuff, and that was the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No,
Waving
I mean,
your passport at them.
no, but I mean, but that was the thing that like really summed it all up for me, because I saw that, and it's like I'd grown up loving American bands, and it's like, and I thought they'd been the most energetic and energizing and imaginative, and you know, all the Blast First stuff and all that. I loved all that. I really caned all that stuff, and you know, for I don't know what. Brett Anderson wrapped himself up in a Union Jack, and so I just found it was just really everything that I was not into at all. I was really, really against it.
And I think that what was interesting is then the post-rock narrative, because that's when Tortoise really started to get
States. No, it did move to America.
And that's when it started to have a completely different meaning. I think that's when it migrated, and at the end of 1994. That was when Tortoise got their first Melody Maker piece, and it started to have a different meaning, which then it sort of then migrated to Mogwai. I mean, I know they're British, but they were very, they were very influenced by American bands. You had Gastro del Sol, the Bradford, who became the kind of meaning of post-rock almost, and that was what people, then Godspeed, of course, being Canadian, and that's what I talk about in the second half of my book. But so how do you feel about your music today? Because I know Graham Hex has just been reissued. How was that to hear that again after all this time and to have it back out into the world?
I managed to get it. It took forever and a lot of money to actually get the tapes back from Universal and all that sort of stuff. Because we were on Virgin, that got bought by EMI, that got bought by Universal, so it's like big fish and bigger fish. So you don't know where all the assets go. But there's a place called Iron Mountain, which is out near Heathrow, and it's like this massive sort of air-conditioned Fort Knox of a place where they keep all the tapes of like everybody, and none of our stuff was labelled up well, or it's all like working titles and stuff. And each time you inquire and get the tapes out from them, which was a load of hassle anyway, it's like it costs money and time, and anyway, so I spent months doing that, and finally got transfers back. I managed to listen to them through once, and I was like, oh, that's not too bad. It's all right. It's all right. So I managed to have like one fleeting listen through of like feeling sort of fleetingly, oh, that's, it's all right. It's good. Okay. Then there's the whole process of like, okay, going and getting it properly remastered and doing all that stuff. And it's just really, really difficult. I find listening to, older stuff or anything they've done like quite difficult, but certainly stuff from like 25 years ago. So, but at the very least, it's like, well, at least with that release, it's as good as it can sound, and I'm happy with it, and it's out there now and all that stuff, and it's done. So it's good, fine, done.
How about the Moonshake legacy? Are there any plans for reissues?
Well, it's still all available streaming. The remaining,
On Spotify.
On Spotify. It's on Spotify. Yeah, so you can listen for free, or if you subscribe.
But everybody likes the vinyl, right?
Yeah, no. There's no way that Beggars will reissue it on vinyl. Beggars Banquet, who they're actually pretty flush. They have Adele, so they've got money. But there was some remaining. I don't know if you know this, but there was some remaining CD stock, which all burnt up in the Tottenham riots. So basically,
I think I was watching my own smoke.
So that music is only available streaming. But it's available. So yeah, there'll be no reissues.
I went through a phase about 2 years ago, just listening to everything I'd done at that time, and just through the 90s. And I don't like the way I sing. I'm trying too hard, but I actually think the music and Margaret's voice, the music especially though, stands up remarkably well. I don't think it sounds old at all. It sounds modern, and I'm quite pleased about that we could do something between 91 and 97 that could sound completely contemporary still. I'm very pleased about that.
Do you know what? That's like one of the brilliant things about my book. One
One of many.
One of many.
It's got covering pages too, hasn't it?
One of the brilliant things I discovered while writing my book is that so much of what I'm writing about the music it just is timeless. So it still sounds as modern and as relevant as it did at the time. And the reason I called it Fearless was for, you know, a number of reasons, but it just felt that when I was interviewing people, there was just like a lack of fear. I can't think of it.
Out there on the cliff face.
But it's
There
like
was a sense of we can do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
No, there was.
Yeah.
There was no. Yeah.
And I was getting asked. It didn't have a title for a really, really long time. It was just called The Post Rock Book, and like my publisher was just like, "Come on, we've got to get this going," and it was just like, what is the one string that I can pick out in all of my interviews, whether it was like Fridge or Godspeed or Moonshake or Bart Psychosis or A.R. Kane or whoever. It was just like we had no sense of where this was going, and we were going to do it anyway. And
We loved music.
yeah,
I think that's definitely.
Like a lot of music.
I think that's definitely true though. If like all the people, if I think of like, you know, Ian with disco and all the different people that I know of like that scene, it's like they put everything they had into it for better or worse, and they, you know, but it's like squatting and, you know, doing it 24/7 basically, and being completely obsessive about it, and really, you know, throwing their all into it for, you know, come hell or high water. So yeah, you could call it fearless, you could call it witless, you could call it toothless, clueless. Yeah. But everyone meant well.
It's rule number one of doing anything good creatively though is to live it. Just, you know, that's the first thing you have to do. You have to be it before you are it. You know.
yeah. Very
That's
good.
my advice.
No, we don't all have to be Shane McGann.
Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, brickbats, bouquets?
I have one. After your career ended, did you have any moment in your life when you want to kill yourself?
That's an interesting question.
Ask my psychiatrist.
No. That I have to say, when I stopped doing Moonshake, I went through a massive artistic block, and what I now know to be depression, but not to the point where I actually wanted to jump off a tower block or something, you know. But it was kind of like there was nowhere to go other than to be kind of normal, which is like everyone is normal, but it kind of seemed like I'd been you know, extraordinary for a while in my own head, and then I had to be completely normal, and I found that strangely depressing.
I'm sorry. What's your name?
Rubens.
Sorry.
Rubens.
Who do you think you are to ask a question like that?
I'm curious to know.
Oh,
'cause
yeah. Have you ever wanted to kill yourself?
many times, and I was in a band in a circumstance similar to yours.
Right.
Not here in Brazil.
Okay.
In the 80s and 90s. So that's why I'm not taking the piss. I'm asking.
No.
I thought it was an interesting question, if a little bit,
Yeah,
brutal.
I want to know.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
Do we have mental
isn't it? That's
health
what
issues?
matters
Yeah,
in the end,
yeah.
isn't it?
I do.
I mean,
I've been on medication. I'm not now.
Right.
most musicians do.
Yeah,
And
it's
being,
kind of part of
being a musician is
yeah.
kind of detrimental to mental health generally.
Yeah.
So it's like, it would come as no great surprise to know that people have had their ups and downs, I would say.
It's perhaps partly to do with the fact that even if you're focused in on what you're doing, you're continually looking for praise or approval from people in some weird way. And if it doesn't come, or if too much of it comes, it completely fucks you in the head, But that kind of uplifted position, which you might even be in the gutter while you have it, disappears when you have to live a normal life and you no longer have it. And this is why you end up with guys who are 60 in Camden being alcoholics but still looking like Johnny Thunders and so forth, Because I laugh at them, but I also think, well, I know why they haven't changed, normal life can be a bit frightening for most people. I think everyone sometimes gets up in the morning and goes, Jesus, And some guys, like the guys I was talking about, avoid it, But so I can kind of rate them in a way. They've carried on doing it. But,
Jeanette, I have a question.
Yes, Mark.
One of the things I found fascinating in the book is the lineage here and the influence of talk.
Yes.
And one of the things that through reading the book, of course, I've been introduced to the music of Dave and of Graham and others. But it was Talk Talk, who didn't quite pass me by because I was aware of their big hit. But I started listening to that, and I don't know if the audience here are bigger Talk Talk fans than me. But could you talk a little bit more about that and whether the influence of it? And my question to the three panelists is: were Talk Talk an influence on what they were producing? I suspect not. Certainly with Graham, but I don't know.
Did you say I suspect not?
Yes.
Oh God! I mean, no, but I mean, I was really into them from God about 1984.
Yeah.
So when I was like about 12,
Yeah.
for some reason I really connected with them. You know, you listen to stuff, you put the radio on or whatever when you're 12, and every couple of years another album would come out, and it'd be, at least in my little mind, it'd be completely different from the album before, and it'd be like this strange new world. Because at that point, you'd be spending all your money that you had on records. Records were expensive, and certainly when you're 12 or 14 or whatever, it's like records are really expensive. So you'd end up listening to them all the time. You'd only have a couple, and you just listen to them, and obsess about them. But I just developed this sort of listening relationship with them, where I could listen to them over and over and over and hear different things every time. And I ended up writing to them when I was at school, when I was like 14. And when they were about to go in to do what became Spirit of Eden, I wrote to them at the studio, just saying, hey, being all naive and stuff, it's like, hey, I'll make you a cup of tea, I can hang, I'd just like to hang out, this is, hey. And obviously I didn't hear anything from them at all. But many years later, I actually, God, it's a really long story. But to cut a long story short, the band was befriended by a man called John Ward, who was going around Leighton impersonating the drummer from Talk Talk, Lee Harris.
I
Everyone's got to have an
love
ambition.
that story.
You've heard about it.
Yeah, no,
So to cut a long story
the
short,
other Lee Harris.
Yeah, and this is like, which is like quite
Bizarre.
a really bizarre sort of minor league character to impersonate.
It's not Jesus.
No, exactly. Or it's not even it's not even like a rock star or anyone.
The drummer from Doctor.
Yeah, it's like, and so, but it was kind of, he was kind of like, he was fucking clever in some ways, because it's before the internet, so you couldn't.
Was he a good drummer?
No, you can't find.
Well, it was like before the internet, so you couldn't really reference stuff. There's not that many photos around. It was like he's let himself go a little bit, as he did. But it's like, and we used to go around to his house, and he had photos on his wall of like him with Mark and Paul, and all this sort of stuff, and. Yeah, and I saw him doing a gig at the Hackney Empire, where his band, it was like this really strange sort of soul band, and they were all calling him Lee as well. So it wasn't just us; it was like a whole bunch of people, and then he was doing DJ gigs as Lee Harris, and at this point, Lee was he was recording Laughing Stock, as it became. So he was like spending 14 hours a day locked away, in a studio for an extended length of time. So he wouldn't have known anything else that was going on at all, apart from that. Eventually, his stories sort of grew and grew, and he got into this thing of like saying, I used to be in the SAS, and my brother was in Free, the band Free. He just started to get more and more cranky, and we'd go round to his house, he'd make us this special coffee where he went into the kitchen, came back, and we'd sort of leave his house like a couple of hours later, and we'd feel really fucked up. Really fucked up. So anyway, stuff started getting really, really odd with it. But he was genuinely very convincing.
Was he a good drummer?
It wasn't bad. He did the head movements and everything. He sort of impersonated Lee from the videos, from like live video. But anyway, so when it became just absolutely ludicrous, like the SES thing and stuff, I managed to contact their manager and sort of say, get a note through to the real Lee, you know, to find out that it was, you know, and then Lee called me via my mum and dad and like left a message saying, look, you know, you've had quite an experience, haven't you? Let's meet up. And so we met up in Stoke Newington and just got really, really fucking drunk. And he remembered that I'd written a letter. That was the thing from like when I was like 14, 15. And he said that was the only reason why he'd rung me up to meet up with him. So it's weird how funny our life goes. He subsequently sent a legal letter to this guy, and he skipped the country. and I ended up, he introduced me to a guy called Phil Brown that engineered a bunch of their stuff, and I ended up working with him a bunch.
Amazing engineer.
Yeah, amazing. And I ended up working with Phil a lot, and Phil taught me a lot, and he sort of mentored me, you know, about a bunch of stuff, and he ended up becoming like a really good friend. So it's really funny. Weird little path, yeah. But yeah, Talk, love them. Great.
And it was
Great band. Love it.
It was also true for American bands, actually. Talk was one of the bands that really spanned the whole post-rock scene. It was Rachel's, for instance, absolutely adored Talk. Laughing Stock was one of their foundational albums that was important when they made handwriting. So I think it can't really be overstated, and Talk also were quite fortunate because they had loads and loads of resources at their disposal. They could do that kind of Brian Eno thing of just going into the studio and not knowing what was gonna come out, which when bands were in more straitened resources couldn't do. So I think that they had that ambition, but they also had the resources to see it through, which didn't really happen again in the kind of stuff that I'm writing about until Radiohead, who kind of are at the end when I talk about Kid A and Amnesiac.
What I really love with the Talk thing of like, because some people get their knickers in a twist about how much stuff costs, and at the end of the day, it's like the artists are paying for it anyway. It's like you do what you like with it. You've got a certain amount of resources available to you, but what I really like is the idea that Laughing Stock costs the same as an episode of EastEnders.
It isn't quite as entertaining.
Boom boom.
I wasn't much of a fan of Talk to be honest. I quite like them, but I was more, you know, I liked more harsher stuff. I liked On the Corner by Miles Davis and that kind of thing, Pill, Can, that sort of. So, but I think we kind of bonded over the one before. What was it called? Spirit of Eden.
I mean, to be honest, Laughing Stock was kind of after the fact for me. I mean, Spirit of Eden was a bit of a revelation. I remember putting it on and just going, wow, oh, okay. And I anticipated Laughing Stock and bought it on the day that it came out, but it didn't have that kind of epiphany thing. Because I don't think it probably did for them either. I think they were kind of reaching for an epiphany, whereas they had it previously, so they weren't gonna.
Plus, they were rejecting the idea of being pop stars, and they were doing all that stuff. Whereas for a weird kind of year or two after grunge and before Britpop, bands like us were being kind of groomed by the music press to actually be pop stars doing this weird shit, and it kind of like. It was kind of gratifying that people actually believed that like doing these records you could eventually be, you know, as big as New Order or something, you know, and or bigger, yeah. And we got the odd fan letter in this country. Do you remember that letter I got with the hearts? I once got this letter that Two Pure gave to me, and I opened it up and there was no letter. There was just loads of crepe paper hearts, and it smelt of white musk, which was kind of a perfume popular amongst.
The Body Shop.
White musk.
There's one across the room.
And right in the middle of all these hearts was a solitary pubic hair.
I was just gonna, and it was ginger.
And I thought that's a bit rude. And then I thought, no, she probably cut them on her bedroom floor. It's like
one of the wonderful things about
We
doing...
think she was Alice.
well, we only assumed that because she smelled of white musk, but it wouldn't necessarily be her. Sorry, Karen.
For me, one of the great things of hosting these events and reading these books is that it does introduce me sometimes and reintroduce me to music I would have missed. And reading a book, and especially with Spotify or YouTube, you can easily access the stuff. And I have to say to both Graham and to Mags and to Dave, it's been a true joy just listening to music that I missed first time round. The first Moonshake EP. 30 years on. This is music, and the reason it's in a book now, and it's about time that book was written about this genre, was because it does have a lasting impact. It was something of some importance. That's why these people have come along today. And I would say, and I feel duty bound to pay homage to the author. If you haven't got the book, it is a fantastic book. I would urge you to buy it. You will not be disappointed. And like I do, read it while listening to Spotify and immerse yourself in some music that you may have forgotten about or you may never have heard. And these guys have been fantastic. Sorry, it's like I'm ending it. I'm not.
It just reminded me, you mentioning the first EP, it kind of also, what it reminds me of is the ineptitude of the independent industry at the time, because we were on Creation, ostensibly, the big up-and-coming label, and they told us, we're not going to fund a video for you because this record's not going to get anywhere. That's basically essentially what they told us, isn't it? Yeah. And then it came out a week later, it was like number 6 on the chart show on ITV, and there was no video. So what they did is they put a promo shot of us in black and white on the screen for a whole 2.5, 3 minutes, and then played our record at the wrong speed.
It was excellent. It sounded like...
It sounded like Swans or something,
yeah,
didn't it?
It did sound like a live Swans record. It was just like this...
They were literally playing a 45 a 45 at 33, weren't they?
Yeah, it was a 45 at 33, and I was like, I didn't even know they played vinyl on the TV, but, it was 1992, so...
It's nice to know that the TV is like as DIY as... You guys were.
They were literally playing a record over the top of a photograph. It was like
amazing.
I watched TV in the Gambia, Gambian MTV, and it was like that. It was kind of like, here I am in my kitchen making music.
I thought at some point they'd go, oh, click, but no, it just went on for about 20 minutes.
Did you all sit around and like watch
it? Speeding up after a few seconds, but no, it just carried on. I had like phoned my mum. We could be on telly.
Yeah, we could be on telly. We're number 4. In the indie chart, by the way. Isn't like
just kind of following what Mark said, really. What I liked about the book was that you had quite a broad sort of definition of what post-rock might include, and there's a lot of people that I've liked all along, never put them in that genre, but loads of bands I've never really heard of before, even though I kind of lived through that era and was into music at the time. And I just wondered whether there were people in the book that you wrote about that you didn't actually like very much. And the flip side of that is whether there's bands that really should have been in there because they really are seen as post-rock, but you left out because you didn't like them. That's
you might very well think that. I couldn't possibly comment. As with any book, there are bands that you like more than others. The band, I suppose, that I felt very, very duty-bound to include, whereas I personally don't... I think they're important, but I don't personally like them too much, is Sigur Rós. And I understand that they're a culmination of a lot of things that I write about, but personally they didn't speak to me in the way that Moonshake, Psychosis, Rachel's, Talk, Slint, A.R. Kane, all those bands that I write about do. So yes, and if you'd picked that up, that I disliked certain acts a little bit more than others, then well done.
I think you were redressing the balance as well, because there was that other post-rock book came out about 6 months earlier, which seemed to think the whole thing was just about Sigur Rós and Mogwai, really. It was essentially shoegazing without the interesting bits. and
that guy didn't do the legwork, though, did he?
No, he didn't. He didn't interview us. That's why I hate him.
I don't even know about this.
There you are.
No, but he didn't speak to anyone. No. I mean, do you know what I mean? That's
quotes from the music papers, aren't they?
Yeah, and
it's really not hard
but that was
these
the thing with like Jeanette. So, but with Jeanette's book, that was the thing that I was like really impressed by, the fact that you actually bothered. You actually bothered to go and speak to people, and you spent all that time and all the effort and all the going into the British Library and doing all that research and all the rest of it, actually doing it properly.
Thank you.
Rather than some fly-by-night 2-bit punch and judy show.
I think it was a bit of discovery for yourself as well. I mean, there were bands in there that you hadn't heard of until you started researching it. So when you had Chorch's Aid and people like this kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I think that is when I started writing this book. There are areas of music that I know a whole lot about, and post-rock wasn't one of those. And I think you come into it with a curious attitude rather than just like, I know it already. When you interview people, when you know it all already, it's kind of a bloodless experience sometimes, because you're just asking them to confirm almost what you already know. But when you know less, you can talk to them in a much more open way, and they tell you stuff that you had not even thought about. And the Caucasade or Caucasade,
I never know how to pronounce it.
yeah, example is a really good one. So Dave told me about this band when I interviewed him.
Who I didn't know at the time. I only found about in the last 5 years myself.
And they're this like teeny band from Cornwall, and they sound like Slint. It was just like, and they were making this stuff in 86, 87, and I managed to track two of the guys down, and it was kind of crazy because no one had heard of the main guy, Noel Lane, who was in this band for a long time. And the last tiny bit of information I had was that he worked for Bristol Council. So, you know, well, you might not know, but councils have like a very, very generic way of emailing. It's like first name dot last name at council.gov.uk. So I basically did that and said, like, hello, you probably don't, this is probably not you, and you know, it'll bounce back, but I'm writing this book, and I've heard about your band, and I think I would like to talk to you about about post-rock. And unbelievably, I got a message back saying, like, I'm sitting here working in a small supported unit for people with learning disabilities, and I never expected an email like this. And so moments like that are really, really important when you're writing a book, to get those like moments together and to actually have that perspective that they never had like much talked about in the music press. And another band like that, Diff Juz, who were on 4AD, but they still didn't get much interview material at the time. So to have that original interview material, I think, is like really, really important to a book. And
Diff Juz are startling. In 1982, and they sound like
yeah,
now, don't they?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I found that just like really important in itself, but also really important to make connections with other things that you hadn't perhaps thought about, which I feel really enriched my own writing experience, and I hope enriched the book as well. Yeah.
Did you speak to Godspeed?
Yes, I did.
And how did you get on with them? Because they're quite mysterious and difficult and elusive.
All those things.
And just with Radio, did you speak to Radiohead as well?
I didn't speak to Radiohead, unfortunately,
okay.
but
I
I
don't
did
know
speak
if Radiohead were influenced by any of this sort of thing.
Yes, they were.
They were.
Definitely
They
influenced
were
by
by Liger. Yeah.
No, and Moonshake. No, I mean, in person, I've had all members of Radiohead say
They knew all that stuff.
both Moonshake.
Yeah.
When we played with them the first time in San Francisco, they were on stage looking at our effects pedals, and
Yeah.
Johnny Greenwood bought a whammy pedal.
He bought a
following
whammy pedal
Moonshake.
because Dave, and that became his like signature sound. I mean, seriously, and
His signature sound.
yeah. I know. Yeah, exactly.
But that also, to be fair, that is how it goes as
Yeah,
well.
no,
isn't it?
but
Do you know what I mean?
musicians
It's like,
were magpies. That's how it
Yeah.
works. That's
Yeah.
how it works. I mean, Radiohead actually had a for Morning Bell, the working title was That Like a Song. So which
And to their credit, they did name drop both Moonshake and Liker in interviews.
Yeah, no,
and
they
stuff,
did.
so-
They tried to, they tried to sell records for us. Just not enough. Sorry.
With the Godspeed question though, that came about because I wanted to speak to Ian Orlavsky from Constellation Records, and that alone would have been enough. But we ended up having like a couple of really, really long conversations, like 2 hours each. And we talked about some really expansive issues, not just the history of Constellation Records, which I kind of knew, and it's boring to go through when you interview someone. But I wanted to talk about some of the political implications of the Montreal scene at that point, and also about the way in which these groups formed, which was completely outside the norm, and how they reclaimed a lot of urban space in Montreal. And I think he was kind of checking me out to see if I was, just someone who was going to treat this subject superficially or not. And thankfully, he understood that I was trying to understand it not just from a musical or a superficial point of view, but to look at what it actually meant to people. So I did get to speak to Ephraim following that, and I have to emphasise that wasn't why I was speaking to Ian. I was interested in the Montreal scene at all as a whole. But yeah, he put me on to Ephraim, and I have to say it was an incredibly nerve-wracking experience because he has a reputation of being quite a prickly character. And there were certain questions, if you asked him anything that was like a sort of what he considered a boring music journalist question, he would just shut down and give you a one-word answer. But for instance, I talked a lot to him about the early years of Godspeed, and that's all in the book, when they were coming together, and it was like 15 of them, and they were putting out this open call for people who had alternative lifestyles, who were interested in this kind of political aspect of Godspeed. And I tried to cover that in the book, and it was interesting. So as a courtesy to all my interviewees, as soon as I finished the book, I sent them the chapters that they were in to say, like, are you happy with how I've quoted you, how I've written about you? Because like most of my interviews, especially with the British post-rock people, were done in the pub. And I know how things, exactly. And I know how things can come across, that you say things and it's, but I did that even with people that I did over Skype or email or whatever. I just wanted to make sure I was representing people correctly. Not that they would censor anything, but just sometimes people don't express themselves quite as well as they would. And I expected Ephraim to come back with like, I know I meant this, I know I said this, and this is how the protests in Montreal went in 1997, not like this. And he came back saying, brilliant, you've got a hit on your hands. So it was just really, really nice. So I think it was a lesson.
No one's ever
to
said
me.
to them.
It was a lesson to me not to like assume people are going to be difficult just because they have a certain reputation, and I do still feel really privileged that he was part of the book, as was like a lot of the other people from the Constellation stable.
Go right back earlier when you talk about Public Enemy, and then we talk about the first and second phase of post-rock. Is that the key difference between that first generation of bands and the second one? You were all using samplers, and then
It was about samples and noise as much as anything, but
And
then
that
it
seems to
became much
disappear.
smoother, I think. Yeah.
It just became about guitar bands.
It did
Yeah.
really.
Again,
Yeah, it
didn't it?
became about guitars again. So I like guitars, but
Yeah.
But that's what it. I mean, I think you might
and
be onto something there. My
Well,
friend.
I don't want to labour the point that I don't like Sigur Rós, but like
please.
one of the things that they were quite proud of with their work was that there was no electronic sound on it.
It's the Albini thing, man.
Well, and
Much. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think he's fantastic. I really, really do think he's fantastic. But it is a very different approach to making things. In
It's a
like it's
dogmatic
about
approach.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's about being a band in a room, a guitar band mainly.
First take.
Yeah.
to also be fair to the post-rock bands who came after, especially Fridge were like massively interested in samplers and electronics. And Mogwai weren't averse to remix culture either. I don't think they get enough credit for that too. So some of the British
Doing
post-rock
remixes or being?
being remixed. Although they have done some, but they did include Slint in one of the remixes that they
Yeah,
used.
you
Yeah,
said
so
that,
yeah. So they weren't averse to it.
But that is a world away from it, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, man. But I was going to say that is a world away
Yeah.
from, being, loving Public Enemy.
But Fridge,
Yeah.
I will.
Do you know what I mean?
I will stick up for what Fridge did.
Oh no,
and
sure. I suppose I'm talking about the big old
Yeah.
Mogwai,
I was just thinking it was techno versus those later bands were all techno influenced, like
Yeah,
Fridge.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas this is hip hop influenced. And
Yeah.
that's
Techno's fucking boring.
I quite like techno. It's just you were
We
clarifying
disagree.
something in my head
That's all.
between, and I like some of those later bands. It's just clarified something in my head that then you have that huge hip hop influence
Yeah.
which suddenly disappears.
Yeah, I think that's also partly because there is a lot of kind of what I call sports metal bands adopting hip hop influences as well, and you wanted to react against that. It was people bouncing up and down in shorts, and rapping over heavy metal guitars. It was
Ned's
kind of,
Atomic Dustbin.
I don't know
Sorry,
any
I
of
don't know
those
why
bands'
that came into my
names.
head. I don't know why why that came into my head.
I've lost my thread now. but I think you might be onto something about the hip hop influence giving way to the more kind of ambient sort of
or even just like electronic. So generally, like just the idea of like dealing with technology and interfacing what you're doing as a guitar band with, it's like you're doing with like resampling what you're doing and stuff like that, as opposed to just okay, we're just going to play this through and we're going to bash it out as a as a live band in a room kind of attitude.
We were very much into the detail of noise. Like the hip hop bands, we would strive very hard to. We wouldn't sample something from a CD. We'd sample it off the vinyl so we could get the vinyl hiss, or we could get the tape hiss, we could get scratches. All these would be incorporated into the sound, and so it would be unmusical to a certain extent. Whereas I think later bands are very much into their pristine kind of using the right reverb and the right guitar, and that's kind of boring to me even now, really.
But was it not? And it might have also been a thing that hip hop had changed from that sort of era of Public Enemy into kind of the Native Tongues stuff that was not quite so confrontational. In that
Sigur
way.
Rós got all gangster, didn't they?
Please don't tweet this about Sigur Rós.
Jeanette, sorry, I'm just conscious of the time. I'm going to, and the shop and the fact that we got Brick Smith locked in here.
She's still here.
I think we should maybe draw a close to this. What I did ask the guys is, it's very nice. We want the conversation to continue, and I've invited these guys to Mirth, Marvel and Maud round the corner. Everybody is more than welcome to join us and ask those questions at the bar. It may seem a little better, but
he hasn't asked us, by the way.
Yeah.
First I've heard of it.
you are more than welcome. I hope you will join us for a beer on me at the bar. There we go. But I would say it is a fantastic book. Some of you have clearly read it, others haven't. I would urge you to buy it. Jeanette and the rest will, I'm sure, sign copies, and in a few years' time you'll be able to sell it on eBay for many, many hundreds of pounds. Sorry, Ralph, I'm doing your bit. Can we just give a big round of applause to Jeanette and our panel?